Yeah, good morning, everybody. This is called something slightly different on the actual app, but the title on the app wouldn't fit on the PowerPoint presentation, so I've decided to call it "Improving the Skyline at Capenhurst" for expediency. So, a little bit about UNS. We provide radioactive waste services, storage of nuclear material, engineering support, but the most important bit is the bit where I work, which is the decommissioning and land remediation, which is what this talks about. Certainly not as complex as the first speaker this morning, so I feel a little bit inadequate in that respect. So, a little bit about me. Senior Project Engineer in Decommissioning, responsible for the control and supervision at the workface for all decommissioning works. I act as the principal contractor for UNS under CDM. I'm the asbestos coordinator, so I'm responsible for coordinating all the asbestos surveys, all the asbestos R&D surveys. I'm a mental health first aider, which we believe is a very important piece of work that we have on the site. I've got 22 years of experience in the chemical industry, process operator to plant manager. My transition into decommissioning began in 2010 when the plant where I was working was being shut down. So I had to put a decommissioning team together to clean it all out to hand over for demolition. And I suppose in real terms, I'm a bit of a nuclear newbie because I've only got 8.25 years of experience at Urenco Nuclear Stewardship. And there are obviously probably people in this room who've done significantly more time than me. I've done land characterisation and remediation projects, done electrical diversions and demolition of a former substation, decommissioning and demolition of former gaseous diffusion plant and subsequent waste management facility, which is still an ongoing piece of work, and completed work on Urenco and NDA-funded decommissioning work. So, the incinerator at Capenhurst, there it is in all its glory. Beautiful structure. It's whatever floats your boat, I suppose. Installed in 1982 and was authorised by the Environment Agency to incinerate radiological contaminated combustible waste. So basically the combustible waste that they generated on site, they put through their own on-site incinerator. Ceased operation in 2007 and selective post-operational clean-out carried out. And I use the term selective very loosely. I think in essence, they shut the gate and walked away, and that was pretty much it. The ownership transferred from the NDA to Urenco UK in December 2012, and again, very loosely, it's been in care and maintenance ever since. I think people might have walked up to the gate and looked to make sure that it was there, and that's probably as much as was going on. So in mid-2020, we began the process of preparing for characterisation, decommissioning and demolition, because too expensive to put back online given the changes in legislation, etc. So it needs to come down. It's in 3 phases. So phase 1 in 2021, characterisation and BAT assessments, so understanding what it is that we're dealing with, and that then informs us how to take it all apart. Radiological assessments to inform the safe systems of work. Site clearance, because it had been sort of inactive since 2007, nature tends to take back over. So the facility was quite overgrown with trees and bushes and various other greenage. Stack dismantling, so the stack was the first stage of this, which is what we're going to go on to in a minute. Demolition of the original access boot barrier, removal of an oil feed tank and bund which sat outside of the area. And in order to be able to do all of that, we needed to install a fit-for-purpose boot barrier because it is a controlled area contamination and permit office. And some service diversions, some old buildings in there, cables running through them that supply other things. The building's coming down, so we need to divert those services out of the ground. The phase 2, which is where we are now in 2022, main plant demolition down to slabs, so that work is actually ongoing as we speak. It's interesting to see that we're not the only site in the world that use miles and miles of orange plastic, because we've got 2 massive enclosures on there at the moment. Management of the resulting wastes, including stack, structural and secondary wastes, so various packaging types, some material going into open-top drums, some material going into FIBCs, some material going into crates to be removed off-site, and then obviously anything that we can get off as free release for recycling, then we've got that element of work as well. Further characterisation of the internals of the incinerator structure. So we could do a lot of the stuff on the outside, but the inside becomes a little bit more complex because it's a completely enclosed system. So systematic characterisation to make sure that we're still going along the right path. Land characterisation, once the main building's down and it's just a concrete slab, we'll do some land characterisation. And then phase 3 will be the slab removal. So that's later this year, going into next year, based on the information that we get back from the land characterisation. Land remediation, if required, following DQO. Why are we knocking it down? So they did a condition survey report in September 2020, and the stack was of particular concern because the holding down bolts that fastened it to the floor were, well, looking a little bit ropey, to say the least. And there was a concern that, given the weather conditions and everything that we have, and when you sort of stood there and watched it on a windy day, it does blow around quite a bit in the wind anyway. It's designed to do that. But there was a concern that it could fall, it could topple. It's right next to an enrichment plant, so it's probably not what you want. And the report was the justification for the demolition on the grounds of safety. So I don't know whether you can see these particularly well, but they're the holding down bolts, and they're actually covered in Denso tape because it was believed that that would slow down the corrosion. Not convinced. But from the condition survey report, that's each one of those bolts. For the avoidance of doubt, green is it's okay. Orange means it's not really okay, and red means it's definitely not okay. So you can see from that drawing there that there's significantly more red and orange on it than there is green, which, you know, feeds into, well, I think we best take it down. Dilapidated buildings. So this is the original access boot barrier, which clearly has been through a great deal of care and maintenance. When you look at some of the pictures on the inside, the ceiling's fallen in, the floor has fallen in. Again, it looks like the lockers were probably emptied on the last shift, and that was it. Everybody left. So that had to come down, which also meant that we had to install a fit-for-purpose boot barrier to be able to carry out the next phases of the work. So the project itself, to say the title is 12 months to plan, 1 day to come down. So we've needed to do a land lease from UUK to UNS. So UNS act as a tenant on the UUK licensed site. It's a UUK piece of land, so we have to do this lease piece where they hand the area over to us, and then we can operate it and work on it under our own controls. Gathering of existing health and safety file information. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, health and safety file information, in the loosest term, generally either doesn't exist or has been filed away in a cupboard many, many years earlier, and the people who knew where it was have left the organisation. So you're basically starting from scratch. That's the most sensible approach. Don't assume that you've got any health and safety information that's existing, because the facility's been empty for 10 years. Gap analysis of missing information, that was quite straightforward. There wasn't any particularly decent information to start off with, so we needed to start from scratch. Installation of a fit-for-purpose boot barrier, we need to get in and out in a controlled way. Asbestos R&D survey, constructed in '82, but some of the buildings on there date back to the 50s, so there's a fair to middling chance that there's ASI materials certainly within the structure of some of the brick buildings. Ecological surveys, as you can see from these pictures here, nature's taken over. Looks really nice on a sunny day, all the green pathways and the ivy growing everywhere. But of course, when nature takes over, that means that we're in a situation where we could have protected species in there, like, for instance, bats. Radiological surveys, just talking about bats, the brick building at the top there, you can't really see it very well on that picture, but there was a tiny penetration hole in the wall where clearly a pipe had gone through at some point. When they came in to do the ecological survey, there was evidence of scratching on the outside of the brickwork. There was evidence of bat drop-ins, so automatically that means we have to do significantly more work to understand whether there are bats living in that building or not, protected species. So the 3 sessions that I did with the ecologist on site during the evening with his little bat detector trying to listen for bats flying around in the air, I said, I thought bats lived in, you know, like bell towers, and there's hundreds of them, and they all fly out like the opening credits of Scooby-Doo, you know, when they're disturbed. And he said, well, ordinarily they do, but when the females get pregnant, they create a maternal roost, which basically means all the blokes get hoofed out. So all the women are living in the bell tower in luxury, and the blokes have to go and find bed sits like these areas here. So this was probably a roost, but one single bloke whose missus was sat in a bell tower somewhere else waiting to have the baby. So I learned quite a bit about bats while we were sat there in the dark. We have to produce production of pre-construction information, scope of work. PCI feeds information comes from all the surveys that we do. Scope of work we put together to put out to tender for someone to come in and do the work for us. We go through a tender process for dismantling, so we send the scope out and then everybody bids on it. We then develop a cost and schedule based on what they're telling us they think it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. Collection, packaging, disposal of plant and redundant equipment in line with the project waste management plan, data quality assessments and BAT assessments. As I alluded to before, care and maintenance, POCO, none of that actually happened. The forklift truck was still parked where it had been left on the last day. There was various drums, bags of material. Once you fence an area off, it's a good place to dump stuff from everywhere else on site as well. So you're really in this situation where you've got to do an awful lot of work to clear an area to be able to do the work that you actually want to do. Vegetation removal, well, that was no mean feat. And of course, you can only cut trees down and cut bushes back at certain times of the year because nesting birds, all that sort of thing. Spoil heap removal. So once you remove the vegetation, you realise that the vegetation is growing on a massive pile of soil that no one knew was there. So it's a bit of an emergent job in terms of as you uncover stuff, you have to do more and more work. And then finally, site preparation to allow for dismantling to take place and planning permission. Believe it or not, you have to get planning permission to remove an eyesore of a stack that everybody in Capenhurst village can see from the bedroom window. I don't think we would have got too many objections from the residents, to be honest with you, but you still have to go through that process, and it's quite an important piece, that. Stakeholder engagement. So this is UNS's first piece of work outside of the NDA decommissioning agreement. So we've always done our work for the NDA. This is the first dialogue between UNS and UUK. So UUK are our clients as opposed to the NDA. And I talk about the stakeholder engagement piece because where this facility is located on site is right next to one of the main access roads on and off the site. And experience has always shown that although people will drive past these facilities for years and go, oh yeah, that's the incinerator over there, as soon as activity starts going on in there, suddenly everybody becomes a demolition expert. Suddenly everybody becomes an expert in whatever it is that you're doing. So it's important to let people know what you're doing before they stop you and tell you that you're doing it wrong. The challenge is large quantities of POCO wastes that required characterisation. So they were there, but we still needed to assay them and packaging for compliant disposal. 450 cubic metres of soil packaged, assayed and consigned as waste using our on-site portable assay system. Restricted space, you start moving bags around, you start generating bags, you've got to store them, you've got to assay them, you've got to move them off, but you can't move them until you know what's in them. So it becomes quite congested. Numerous stakeholders, as I've already alluded to, because everyone's an expert. And then once you've done all that, you identify that right where you want to put the feet of the crane to lift the stack down, there's a massive soft area of soil that no one knew about. Everywhere else is concreted apart from this one square right in the middle. It's like, what happened there? Why didn't they just concrete that? No one knows what was there. Goes back to the health and safety file information. Another 150 metre cubed of waste material removed to get a decent enough subground to be able to backfill it so that we didn't have a 60, 70 ton crane toppling over on the day of the lift. So there it is. It's a lovely shape. I don't know what was there before. No one really does, but we took the liberty of doing some characterization work while we had the opportunity. So samples taken, sent away for analysis for a wider project on the site for land contamination. And I believe that way back in the 50s and the 60s, this was where all the trains used to come in off the railway line and park up. So it's probably a hangover from way back then. There we are backfilling it, and the last picture in the corner there it is, beautifully level. We're ready for the crane, but you can see that the area is quite big now because all the vegetation's gone, all the piles of soil, all the POCO waste. So we've actually generated quite a decent sized working area now. On the day, so the stack came down in 3 sections. That is, I watched that MEP and I thought, you'd never get me up in that. Like it's, I think it's got a 40 metre reach or something like that. John, who's the guy who's burning the holes in the top piece for the lifting chains, is up there in the basket at the top. But boy, does that thing move when they move around on it, and it's like, well, I'm bad enough up here on a stage, and that's the floor there. There he is. There's little John putting the 2 holes in the top in the man basket on a crane, because that MEP, believe it or not, wouldn't reach the top. That's the first section coming off and being lowered to the ground. Now this bit here always puts the dread of fear into me, because there's a link here that will show the whole thing in time lapse, but I could never actually normally get it to work. But there's people working tirelessly in the background, so if you can play that video for me, please, it'd be great. So this is the day of the lift, 8 o'clock in the morning. And there it is done. 24 seconds, I think that video is. If only it was 24 seconds in real life, it'd be great. Okay, so some do's, don'ts, and learning from it. Do get to know your contracting staff. They're a significant part of your team. Take the time to get to know your names. These guys who are doing all this work are the ones who are going to be the success or failure of your project. Not me, not the project manager, not the other project engineers. It's the guys on the ground doing the work. So you have to treat them as part of your team, your project team. Do be prepared to put a lot of front-end work in. I think I've kind of summarised it in the previous slides about how much work goes in at the front end just to do that one-day activity. And I think that's the bit that people don't really grasp, because you look at it and you think, it's only a stack. How hard can that be to take down? You know what I mean? It's just take it down. But you have to put all that information together to be able to do it safely. Early characterization and waste planning pays dividends. Don't take it down, put it on the floor, and then decide what you're going to do with it. Do all that while it's still upright, and then when you get it down on the floor, you can get rid of it. Form a team who can deliver all the requirements to make the job successful. So radiological protection, massively important, waste, the transport people, and again, the boots on the ground actually doing the work. Do plan to conduct surveys, because guess what? That information generally isn't there, or it's been done so long ago that it's no longer relevant. Celebrate success. Your team has earned it. So I get the opportunity to come out and talk to people like you about, look at what we've done. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that's been done here, as well as other work that's going on the site. Enjoy it. The sense of achievement's worth the effort. Even on the darkest days, you just think to yourself, oh my God, how long is this going to take to do? It's only a stack, let's get it down. But you know that once you've pushed that boulder all the way up to the top of the hill and you get to the peak, once it starts, it's going to go down the other side really fast. And that's the analogy that I use. Don't assume all the historical information will be available at the start or is still valid. We've walked in that moonlight too many times now to be able to say, yeah, we've got a full suite of documentation. Usually it's not the case. Don't manage the job from your desk. It's important to get out there. It's important to see what's going on. It's important to understand what the issues are that the guys are having when they're doing the work, because you only know what you know until you don't know what you know. And you will always come across stuff. As I've alluded to, you remove vegetation and, well, where's that big pile of soil come from? So it's important to be there and understand what the issues and the constraints are. And don't rely on planning approval coming through on the proposed date. So the original date for this was I think it was a year ago today. Planning application had gone in months before. We were getting the assurances from the planning consultants. Yeah, you'll have planning permission by that date. So we organised the crane. We organised everything to come in on that day. Yeah, you'll have planning permission on the Friday before. And the Friday before came and went, and we still didn't have planning permission. And we thought, right, well, we better knock this on the head, because what we don't want is a crane sitting here that we're paying for that we don't need. It's better to cancel. It came through a week later. So planning was the key one, because trust me, you don't want to be taking that down if you haven't got the nod from the council. That's it. Has anybody got any questions? Thank you for your time.
Got a couple of minutes for questions. Has anyone got anything immediately for Billy? Oh, sorry, down at the front here, look where the mics are.
I'm just going to grab a glass of water because I've got a really dry mouth now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was fascinating. It occurred to me, you said everyone became a local expert on demolitions. Did you get any feedback from the local community after the job had been completed?
So from the outside community, no, because the facility is so far within the boundary of the site that I probably exaggerate a little bit when everybody in Capenhurst Village can see the stack from the bedroom window. But I'm sure that there are people that are. But I think the key thing for us is that it was an important milestone in UNS's journey, if you like, because we've always done our work for the NDA. The NDA have always been our paymasters. And this was the first time that we were doing this for a different client who just happened to be our licensee as well. So it was very important to be able to engage with everybody early to make sure that they were aware of what was going on. Because the last thing that you need to do is roll the cranes in and then someone says, well, what's going on here? Like, how long's this been going on for? So I guess it's, you know, don't work in a silo. Just get out there and speak to people. Invite the people to the meetings. They can choose to come or not, but at least they've had the opportunity to come. But you know, on the day there was no one who came round and said, "Sorry, mate, you've done that wrong." You know what I mean? So I think we did all right. But it's a moving feast, isn't it? In that respect, that was just the start. So we're doing more and more work now. So that dialogue goes wider and wider and wider.
At the end of there, if you don't want, lovely. Please, yep.
When you found the state of the bolts, did that move up the time scale at all?
It did, yeah, because they'd obviously been reviewed periodically prior to that. But then there was a genuine concern from the clients that the stack was in a fairly precarious position. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it would have blown over. You know, they're not sort of B&Q bolts that are holding it down. They're quite substantial bolts that are where the stud work's actually fastened into the concrete. But I think that definitely put a sense of urgency on it, because it was one of those jobs that yeah, we need to do it. We'll get round to it. We'll crack on with it in a year's time or 2 years' time. But the report basically said, look, you really need to do something about this now. It's either change all the bolts out, change the stud work, or tell you what, why don't you just take it down? So yeah, it did increase the priority of it. Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
I just wondered what sort of levels of contamination were on the inside of the stack, and where did it end up?
That's an excellent question, and I probably haven't got the answer to that. Not very much, yeah. Which is good news, because that basically means that the incinerator did what it was designed to do. The thing with all of these things is that it was operated on shifts, and there is an individual in the room who used to operate it on shift, and what happens on a night shift probably isn't necessarily what maybe should happen on a night shift. So I guess the information gathering piece is you need to really understand it was only ever supposed to incinerate low enriched material, so up to 6%. But because we had an HEU facility on site, there was always a concern that some HEU might have gone through it, which would have created a different dynamic. But the characterization demonstrated that it was fairly, I'm not going to use the word clean because it's not clean, but below the levels that we were kind of pessimistically expecting.
Did you characterize it at all before it came down?
Yes. Yeah. So basically we did monitoring of the outside, and we actually cored through the actual stack itself to take samples, because what you don't see in those pictures is the actual base piece has got like a concrete lagging on the inside that's probably about 250 mil thick, really, really hard concrete, because obviously the temperature is quite high going through there. So the concern was how much contamination has been absorbed into that concrete lining. So as a consequence of that, we had to core through the outside of it and actually take samples of the inners. And then once it was down on the floor, we could do more of that because it was safer to do so.
Any others? Perfect. So yeah, one down the front here.
Hi there. I was just wondering, with the expertise and the knowledge you've gained from doing this work, have you been invited to get involved with helping other people support similar work, or are there other things you're likely to get involved with as a result of this? Well,
with the exception of my hair being significantly greyer now than it was probably 2 years ago, UNS have been this sort of, well, we've been a number of things. We were BNFL, we were Sellafield, we were CNS. We had different coloured clothes to everybody else, even though we were part of Urenco. So we were very much treated as a sort of an ancillary part of Urenco that didn't really matter. But the great thing is that over the last 3 to 4 years, that dynamic has changed. Urenco Nuclear Stewardship, we've got the same colour blue logo now as the rest of Urenco. So now we're in the position where we are responsible for the decommissioning of all of the Urenco work on site. So yeah, that was the test. And as with all of these things, I mean, don't get me wrong, that all the NDA work hasn't been any easier than that, like, you know what I mean? Because they're all legacy buildings. We all know what these legacy buildings are like on these sites. They're basically covered in cobwebs and no one's been in them for years and no one really knows what went on. So yeah, it's been a good advert for us in that respect, because we needed to demonstrate that we were competent to do it, basically. It's like, passing your driving test, isn't it, I suppose? But yeah.
Thank you very much, Tony.